Hey, everybody. I'm Rebecca from Thieving Otter Farm,
And I'm Leah with Southern Biophiliac Urban Farm.
and we are two chicks Caternix bringing you the scoop
Not the poop.
on Caternix quail. Well, today we are joined by one of our most favorite people and probably the smartest and best quail breeder in the country, Micheal Rose.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks.
Hi. Micheal, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now?
Sure. So I've been breeding quail for several years. I ran the farm Southwest Game Birds in Arizona. I've recently relocated to Texas, and I'm running a coaching program for Coturnix quail called Quailology, where I teach different breeding techniques, and it's catered to people who want to go a bit deeper into genetics or create their own line or just have a specific goal that they want to breed toward, and we help them do that. So it's lots of fun.
Awesome. We actually, so if you want to know more about quailology, we're going to be talking a little bit more later on. But also, we did a whole episode with Micheal talking about quailology. So if you want kind of a deeper dive, be sure to check out that episode. So we've asked Micheal to join us today because we're going to be talking about kind of a hot topic, one that we see a lot of, that kind of makes good breeders twitch a little bit when we see this, these keywords. So we wanted to talk about it and talk about why good breeders might want to help educate other newer breeders about this topic. And that's new blood.
When starting a journey, it's helpful to know where you want to go. So, what is your idea of the perfect bird? Do you have a perfect color, temperament, conformation, production, and size in mind?
Yeah, it's a good idea to, kind of set goals. If you're going to be putting birds in a cage with the intention of breeding them, what do you want to see out of it? What would be your end goal? So a good breeder produces uniform and consistent birds. So this is a good place for you to watch our breeder versus reproducer episode and think, do you want to be a breeder or do you want to be a reproducer? So when you order birds from someone, you want to get what you purchased. So you don't want to order one thing and get 27 variations that you didn't ask for. So if I order jumbo browns, I want jumbo browns. I don't want Egyptians. I don't want English whites. I want jumbo browns.
And that's jumbo.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be the other thing. You want what you ordered, what you paid for. And you want to be able to reproduce those birds and get more of what you ordered without surprises. So if you put those birds in a pen and you start breeding them, you're not going to produce English whites or Egyptians or, calicos or anything else. Because you may want to use them for starting your own breeding program, and a mixed bag of genetics will set you back.
So, a good breeder produces uniform and consistent birds. So, keep these points in mind if you want to be a good breeder. What do you want to be known for? Now, if you're just producing, say, meat and eggs for your family, this point isn't as much of importance. But if you're going into a business side of things, it is.
So, yet again, a good breeder produces uniform and consistent birds. Do we see a theme here? Even if you aren't selling and are just hobby breeding, a good goal to have is a line or lines of birds that are as good as you can breed and represent your end goal. It's even if you're breeding for yourself for meat and eggs, it's good to breed towards conformation to make sure that the birds are able to hold up their body weight, and produce for you for a long time. You know, good breeding isn't just color. It's about producing a bird that will produce for your family as well.
I feel a lot of people get tripped up on color too.
I agree. I agree. And it's not nearly as important as temperament and conformation and some of the other factors. So let's talk about starter birds.
So we have a really good episode for this one too. It's our 2 cents on if you should get started with eggs, chicks, or adults. So if you're not sure where to get started, make sure to check out that episode. But when you are getting started, less is more. So it's good to have a smaller quantity to kind of figure out your goals. And a goal of a good breeder should be to have birds that are very uniform and consistent. You want to know what each generation is going to give you.
Mhm.
That uniformness and consistency are achieved by narrowing down the genes and getting rid of the recessives. The more birds you use from different sources, the more genes that you could have influencing your line, which could bring out negative traits. And you can often achieve more with just a pair of birds than you can by breeding a whole flock together.
So, Michael, what do you look for in starter birds?
Um, I definitely so when you're if you're trying to do something with specific egg or plumage mutations, you have to make sure those mutations are present.
Hmm.
And aside from that, I'm almost always looking for the exact same things, which are bright eyes, healthy alert, good temperament. I don't want an aggressive bird. Males that are gentle with the females, birds that can stand upright and alert and walk. They eat well, they lay well. So just all the traits that lead to a bird that you would want to have as a pet, or that you would want to have around, or that you would want as a good producer. And I think that's why what you see with a lot of breeders is they end up selecting for the exact same things, and all their birds sort of approach that the longer they breed them. And the first point on there, I mean, it's kind of the same as the last bullet point, is that it's hard to explain to someone who's new at this just how few birds you need to get started,
Hmm.
and how much better off your flock could be if you started with less than 5 birds instead of starting with 500. So I've gone about it both ways, and some of my best results are from very, very small single digit numbers of birds.
I agree. I have started entire lines with just two birds before. Yep.
Yeah, I've done plenty of small numbers.
Yep. So starter birds again, building on what Michael said, you want them healthy. You don't want to start with weak, sick, or otherwise unhealthy birds. And zero defects or as few defects as possible. Never start with birds that have or have had defects, and you definitely don't want to fix defects and then breed that bird. So that means if you hatch a batch with curled toes, and then you go about trying to fix those curled toes, if that curled toe on that chick is genetic, you're risking passing that genetic defect on to future birds. So with good breeders, we don't try to fix defects. And then conformation. Conformation can be improved during the breeding program, but it's better to start with the closest to the best as possible. So if you have a choice between breeder A, who is focusing on conformation and definitely making that part of their breeding program, it might be better to get birds from them versus breeder B, who doesn't necessarily know about conformation or doesn't select for conformation, and just kind of puts birds in a cage and sells eggs.
Also, on this, going back to the point in the previous slide, if you have, let's say, 10 birds and you're really only really, really happy with 2 or 3 of them, you do not need the genetic diversity of all 10 of those birds. If you've got 2 that stand upright and look really healthy, and the rest all kind of have a hunchback, or they drag their belly, or they don't walk quite right, you don't want to be breeding those birds. You're just not going to enjoy raising them as much, and you'll be so much farther along if you just start with those 2 or 3. that look really good, and then take all of their offspring to make a colony of 10 or 15 or however big a colony that you're looking to have.
That's a really good point. Don't just try to fill a cage. Absolutely. So some other things to think about, Leah.
Big one is temperament. So you don't want aggressive birds. Temperament goes a long way with enjoying your birds, plus having good egg production. And if you want to hear more about aggression, you should watch our 2 Chicks, 2 Cents on aggression. It's a great episode for that. Back to color and pattern. This is really the least important thing. This you can fix later as long as you've got those genes to get to the plumage you want. That's what's important with that. And then, of course, color and pattern can be important if you're wanting to work with a certain color and pattern. But with that, you can start with birds that meet all of the other criteria first and then fine tune them.
Exactly. So the saying in breeding is build the barn and then paint it. So you want to have the good structure, the good temperament, the health, all those things, and then fine tune your color. And of course, like Michael says, you know, if you're wanting to make a line of a certain variety, you do have to have the genes for that variety in the line while you're building it. So, you know, you need to worry about color and pattern to create a line of that color and pattern, but you can perfect that color and pattern later, if that makes sense. And now a word from our sponsors.
Southern Biophiliac Urban Farm. Life and love connect. Where careful and thoughtful selection is maintained to bring you quality birds that are vibrant, good-natured, and productive. We continuously strive to move the industry forward through research and education, ensuring that we bring you birds that will provide you with years full of healthy food, fun experiences, and the freedom that self-sufficiency brings.
Thieving Otter Farm. We breed for temperament and health, and take pride in happy birds, with a goal that each generation is better than the last, so that you can be just as proud of our birds as we are. Okay, so now let's start getting into the nitty-gritty of breeding. So each of these circles represents a bird and the genetics that that bird might have. And this is a pretty simplified, you know, little visual. Michael, how many genes does a quail have?
Quail has about 22,000 genes.
So yeah, little oversimplified here, but this will give us an idea. So each bird will have its own set of genetics to contribute to offspring. And it's important to note that the more birds you start with, the more genetic diversity you'll be starting with. So, as Michael mentioned before, if you are starting with a group of 10 birds and one of them has a hunched back and one of them can't stand up good and one of them you fix the curled toes on, you're adding that genetic diversity into your breeding program when you start. So each of the offspring will inherit the genes from each parent. So here's a visual. The genes from the previous 2 birds have now been passed on to the offspring. And now there's a lot more, there's quite a few more genes involved in these birds.
If you want uniform and consistent birds, you need to narrow down the genetic diversity to only the traits that you want to keep in your program. So you'll want to breed these birds using a breeding program in such a way that you'll be selecting the desirable traits and weeding out the traits that you don't want.
So here I've got some pictures of some black quail. And when I started with my black line, I had a goal of making healthy birds with good conformation and good temperament that were good producers. And I wanted them as black as possible without additional markings. So kind of the birds in the center of this group were more what I was looking for, but I also got some that were light gray, some that had white on them, some that had extra markings. There was all kinds of stuff. So my goal was to try to breed down to those center two birds. So Micheal, this is a chance for you to kind of talk, we mentioned breeding program. But we're not really going to go into detail about what an actual breeding program is. So we're going to give you a chance to talk about quailology and what you teach there.
Oh, awesome. So basically, if you're thinking about the 22,000 genes that you're playing with and the way that those are inherited, most people think they're inherited randomly. They aren't necessarily inherited randomly. There's a lot of control that you can have when you're setting up strategic breeding scenarios. But you do want to watch out for bottlenecks, and there's a balancing act between something like inbreeding depression and the other end of the spectrum with genetic diversity. So if you're trying to avoid too much genetic diversity so that you can have some control over what your birds are producing, and also avoid all of the bad traits that come from being a little bit too aggressive, there's a lot of different strategies that you can use when you're breeding. So most people will start in a colony, and I think that's appropriate. And learning selection and which traits are out of your control, which traits are in your control, whether it's controlled by one or more genes or many genes, and prioritizing which traits you should select out or in or toward first, and which ones should wait till further generations is kind of what quailology is about.
So what exactly is quailology?
So
As
it's a
far as,
website, yep,
yeah,
and
okay,
an
there you
app.
go.
And so if you go to quailology.com, you'll be prompted to either download the app or create an account on your computer. And once you have an account, it's a subscription, and it's currently priced at $30 a month to have access to training tutorials, some different resources, a community of other breeders with all kinds of interesting goals that are in the program. And it's also an easy place where you can ask questions of myself or of the other breeders in the program. And you don't have to worry about the keyboard warriors that are online. So it's a very fun community, very kind, and pretty uplifting, I think. What do you all think of it? I know you're both in it.
Oh, I love it.
I love it. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
So I think one of my favorite parts of quailology are the gosh, now I'm drawing a blank. Some more editing here. Okay.
I like
I
the board pieces a lot.
Yes. So I think my favorite part of quailology are the coaching calls. So I think it's
Yeah,
really
that's
cool to have access to Micheal, who, like, I swear, Micheal, you are the smartest person I know. And your knowledge of quail is unmatched. So be able to have one-on-one coaching calls with you to ask questions and work through, maybe a problem that I think I'm having, or setting up my goals before I start a program, is invaluable.
Thanks for saying that. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for you.
Oh, absolutely. There's no way. Yeah. So for those of you watching or listening, you really should check out quailology if you want to kind of go to the next level in your breeding program, or just want to learn more about quail in general. Like I really got so much out of your in-depth videos on each gene. like the plumage genes, it blew my mind.
I've
think
listened multiple times too.
Yeah.
One of the things I wish
something each time and I catch it the next.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things I wish a lot of people could get is the value of just understanding how easy starting a breeding program is and how much money you could save if you know how to start it properly. So I hope the first few tutorials in the introductory series kind of distill that. And I've gotten a lot of feedback that they do. They kind of ease the burden of breeding isn't too complex. This is something that I can do and that I can do well. And oh, I didn't need to set up 12 different cages to make sure that I'm not inbreeding it. I could set them up strategically and save a lot of space and a lot of feed, a lot of time and a lot of money. So
Absolutely.
I think the value that you maybe get out of your first month, a lot of people join and just join for 1 month, watch the tutorials, and then cancel, and they've gotten hopefully way more than $30 of value out of that.
I agree. And I would recommend, if you are one of those people that join and, check out everything on the site and then unsubscribe, to check back later on, because you are adding stuff on a regular basis. So that's always fun too.
Trying to. Not as regular as it should be.
Okay, so let's get back to our start of breeding here. So Leah, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so your offspring. A breeder selectively breeds to weed out the genes that they don't want. So any recessive traits you don't want, any defects, that's where you're starting off here.
Yep. So that's kind of represented here. We've selectively bred out some genes that we didn't want. Those the little circles to the side. So here are some examples when I was working on my black line of a cull versus a keeper. And this is just looking at plumage. Of course, there were plenty of things I selected as far as health and conformation, but just looking at plumage, I was looking for a solid black bird without any additional markings. And you see that the bird on top had some additional striations in the feathers. So I was looking for solid black without anything extra. And then here's just another example of that.
So you want to use selection and culling to form a line to work towards your goals. And there's many different things, dependent on what your goals are to breed towards. So some of those things are culling out defects like curled toes, any deformities in spine, eye deformities, and there's quite a few others. Any birds that are weak, you don't want to breed weak birds, so you want to cull those out. Temperament is important. Your flighty or aggressive birds, if you're wanting to breed towards temperament. Conformation, and this is something that you learn over time, is that good body structure for production. Vigor has to do with health and the birds having a strong curiosity, being able to move around well. And the color and pattern is, again, it's the kind of the lower one on the totem pole, but you want to select towards your goals.
All right, there we go. Okay, so we've done this. We've worked hard. We've selected and culled and have uniformity and consistency. So look at my group of birds here. They all look about the same. I've reached my goals. They're nice and black. I'm super happy. What could I do to mess this up? There's the blood curdling scream here. New blood. Ah.
Rebecca, don't you love it when a customer calls you and says they're having trouble with your birds and lets you know that they bred them to another breeder's birds to keep them healthy and want to know what they should do for the next generation?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite. I've done all this work. I've, selected out and bred out defects and worked for temperament, and then they add somebody else's birds. Mhm. It's my favorite.
I think what a lot of people don't realize, one, so as a generality, you get the defects from both lines, you don't improve it. Usually you just double your problems. But
Yep.
also, there are so many, because there's 22,000 genes and so many traits are controlled by more than one gene, there are so many gene interactions that you don't even know about that could affect you two, three, four, 5 generations down the line that
Hmm.
may have never been a problem, or one of the contributing genes was bred out by a intelligent breeder a long time ago. But now you've stirred the pot and made some genetic soup that is going to recombinate in a way that's just problematic down the line or right away.
Yeah.
And there's single genes where it's a simple defect, and those are hard enough to read out. But I think the ones that are controlled by multiple or many genes are some of the most difficult because they don't pop up in a large percentage of your birds, but if it's there,
Hmm.
it's just persistent.
Absolutely. And you don't really know those things are present until after you've bred for a while. If you're lucky, they'll show up in the first generation and you can go, oh no, what did I do? Let's stop this. But
Mhm.
sometimes they don't show up for a little while. Um, I would, so there are times when, and I want to bring this up now before we get into this. This is we're talking about an established line. So in this instance, we're talking about my black line. I did all this work and I made them great. And then, if I take somebody else's black line and add it to my line, this is what's going to happen. Now, there are plenty of times where we might want to outcross and add a different line to an existing line. So but we're going to make what's called a subline. We're gonna take a small group from our main line and we're gonna put them in a different cage and we're gonna put those birds together. But we're never going to mess up our main line and just add birds to it. We're gonna put them aside and do our experimentation and make those crosses and whatever. But we're talking about something different that you'll cover in philology, right, Michael?
Yep, that's covered in detail.
So this is all talking about you have an established line, you don't want to add stuff to it. All right, so the dangers of adding new blood, defects. So not every breeder has weeded out defects. Um, some people that's they don't know how to do it, or they're just a reproducer and they just put birds in a cage and they're not thinking about that, or maybe they're the ones that are fixing the toes, the curled toes on the hatched chicks. Um, so if you take birds from those breeders and put them in with your birds that you've worked so hard on and weeded out those defects, now you're throwing those defects back in. So different breeders may have different defects. So not every line is perfect. Leah, do you have any perfect lines?
Nope.
I don't either. Um, every line is a work in progress. And you may have weeded out most of the problems, but it'll take forever to weed out everything. So if I'm particularly working on defect A and the birds I introduce have defects B and C, well, now we've got defects A, B, and C in our line. Temperament. Not all breeders select for temperament and call for aggression or flightiness. And let's take a second here. Michael, why is aggression and flightiness important? Why is it important to think about those factors?
There's lots of reasons, but I think the most common is you want to enjoy raising your birds,
Hmm.
and you have them in likely some sort of captive environment, whether that's an aviary or a cage, and they can't necessarily escape from each other like they could in the wild. They can't run away. So if you have a bird that is as aggressive as a wild bird, that may not be a good situation in a domestic environment. And there's there's a lot to be said about how long it takes to create a good temperament. And with enough genetic diversity, most birds will revert to their wild type state. And so if your strategy is to outcross, 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 find as many new genetics and mix them into your line as possible, then it will just have a tendency to revert back to the wild type state. So you'll have a small bird that is more nervous and possibly has aggression issues, and you'll lose anything special about a line. Let's say you want a jumbo line, or you want a line that lays a specific type of egg or acts a certain way. Those traits are very, very difficult to keep when you're adding new blood. But yeah,
Mhm.
temperament, it's one of the most important, I think, as far as just enjoyability of raising birds and keeping your birds happy and healthy.
Agreed. And also, if you think about it, with production as well, if you've got a bird that's constantly harassing your other birds, if your other birds are being stressed out by that bully, they're not going to lay as well.
Yep. And something
It
interesting then, what are you breeding for? Are you breeding
exactly.
for the bird that is not as easily stressed, but maybe only lays an egg once a week? Or you're essentially taking your best layers and telling them you don't want to select for that trait.
That's a really good point. Um, and then additionally, stress can cause eggshell defects. And so if you are, wanting to produce good eggs to sell or to eat, if you have a bird that's bullying your other birds and, that stress is creating eggshell defects, that's fewer eggs that you can put in a carton, or in a box to ship. So, yeah. And then, of course, if on the other side of it, if you have aggression, where they are actually injuring the other birds, then that can cause a big problem. Or flightiness, where every time you walk into the quail room or by their cage, they're flushing and injuring themselves on the side of the cage. That's no fun either.
No.
Definitely. And if you're a hobbyist, it's let's say you just got some quail from the feed store and you're trying it out or from Craigslist. They're probably going to be very flighty, and
Mhm.
you might just decide you don't like them. And
Yeah,
I've had customer after customer after customer when I was selling eggs say, I didn't know raising quail could be like this. Like they walk up to you for treats and they come up to the front of the cage to say hi when you walk by. So it's like a completely different animal if you breed for temperament.
absolutely. Especially, if you have children that want to interact with these birds. If the bird will sit calmly in their hand versus when they walk up to the cage, it's flying around and trying to batter itself on the inside of the cage. That's a big difference for the children's experience with them. Leah, it seemed like you were about to say something.
Oh, well, I was going to say, like, locally we have more people wanting to show and do 4-H with quail. So, and I've set up quite a few kids with them. So, yeah, I like to have the nice calm birds.
Oh, that's a good point. Quail are increasingly being involved in shows, even like APA shows. And the first show that I went to, the judge actually remarked, he's like, I was actually worried about judging these birds because I thought when I walked up to the cage that they would actually fly around and injure themselves when I went to reach in to judge them. And he's like, they just sat there. He's like, I'm not used to this. So yeah, that's a good point as well. Okay, so other dangers of adding new blood, disease. So buying from multiple sources increases the risk of introducing disease on your farm. There's not a whole lot of diseases that can pass through the egg. So buying hatching eggs can be fairly safe, but there are some. Mycoplasma would be a big one. And then unwanted genes. Not every breeder has pure lines. And by that, I mean like you could have rue hanging out in male carriers, and suddenly you have that popping up in your line that you didn't really want or expect. or dotted white. That's another one that we see popping up sometimes.
There's
um,
also definitely possibilities for genes that will ruin your line that you
mhm.
can't breed back out. So I know breeders who have, for example, had a white line and gotten the silver gene mixed into it, and you can't see
Oh
that
yeah,
with white. And when the silver became prolific enough that it became homozygous, suddenly they had a large percentage of their birds just dying in the brooder or going blind or whatnot. All the problems that you have with homozygous silver. So if you're not careful and you mix something in, you may not know it until it's too late.
absolutely. Um, and then starting all over. Every time you add new blood, you're starting all over from the very beginning. You're recombinating those genes and putting you back straight to that start. So let's do a little visual on what this kind of looks like.
I'm trying to make out all the little like details.
What's that?
Instead of trying to make out all the little details.
Okay.
It's clear as mud.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I can do this one. So basically, this kind of represents, your line. So you've got these genes, you've selected out stuff that you didn't want, and then you're adding new blood, and you can see that they're not the same genes as what your line has. They might be the same color when you look at them, but there's stuff in there that you might not be able to see visually. So the offspring are going to inherit from both those birds, and they're going to have a combination of those genes. So let's say now you have those offspring that you've added that new blood. What happens if you add more new blood? Like you buy from another breeder. And so now you've got these offspring, these new offspring, and now they've got even more new genes that you may not even realize that they have. And now you're back to ground zero and have to start all over again. So you're back to that just basically reverse the slides, start the show over again.
Right.
Or you have to start weeding stuff back out.
Or what a
Okay,
lot of
so
people do, you just become okay with mediocre birds.
yeah,
And
there's that too.
every time bad traits pop up, you add more, but you get some almost hybrid vigor of sorts for one generation and a false sense of confidence. Because in one generation, most of the bad traits are recessive and heterozygous, so they're not going to show up for another generation. And you kind of end up in a vicious cycle. And it's
Mhm.
always mediocre because you can't actually breed selectively for a long period of time that way.
Absolutely. So many people think that you need new blood. And let's talk about ways that you can avoid adding new blood. Leah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So breeder selection, it's good to start with birds from a good breeder who has actually taken a lot of the work and done it for you. This way you're not having to be as selective with building your birds.
Yeah, it's always great when somebody has already worked on conformation, worked on temperament, worked on health and vigor, and you can just kind of take over that line and make it yours. Or you can, buy from a reproducer or, kind of, just some random person or somebody local that doesn't select for those things. And that's a whole different ballgame. So you can make it your own. So if you want to make your own line, you can do that by your own selection and culling, or by doing the outcrossing in the beginning. So if you want to mix two different lines or outcross to something, you're doing that in the very beginning of your breeding program. You don't want to get a good line going and then add new blood. So you want to do all this from the start. So back to that other slide of you're starting over from the beginning. So, if you go, you know what, I like the traits from this line, but I also think I could add something great from this line. Do that in the beginning, right when you start.
So it's good if you need more to buy more from the same breeder. If you feel that you don't have enough birds for your line, it's a good idea to purchase more birds or eggs from that same breeder with the same genetics. That way you're not creating genetic soup. You're going to stay more consistent with the birds that you have. And those same genetics does not necessarily mean that you're inbreeding. A lot of breeders will have multiple cages of their same line, and we're selecting eggs from those different cages so that you won't be breeding necessarily direct siblings.
So, Micheal, you used to have a lot of jumbo browns, right?
Correct.
And so you had your own line and you had your standard for your selection and culling, and your birds were fairly consistent and uniform. Um, so if somebody bought your birds and wanted more of them, they could do so without risk of like them being direct siblings, because you had multiple cages, right?
Correct. The odds of a direct sibling, even if it came from the exact same breeder cage, is quite low. You may get a half sibling or cousin,
Hmm.
but the odds of a direct sibling, there's so if you're buying from a breeder that has thousands of birds, it's never going to happen. But if you're buying from a smaller breeder who maybe doesn't, and let's say they just have one colony cage set up, you're still better off buying from the same breeder instead of adding new blood, because A, the odds of it being an actual full direct sibling is still low, even in a small colony environment. And the odds of that in your colony, after you've raised that direct sibling, choosing to make, because there's also sexual selection in your own colony,
Hmm.
they'll do a fairly good job of choosing the best mate out of the available options in the colony. So you have those two competing odds to create unnecessary inbreeding, and it's just very unlikely. So it's usually a non-issue. Usually there's 100 other things that will be more problematic than direct sibling inbreeding by ordering from the same source.
And we should probably also point out that this is the same source of a good breeder. Like if you got your birds and they had defects or they were aggressive or whatever, you don't necessarily want to go back and get more eggs from them or live birds. So,
Correct. And a lot of people will, that's why they'll go to a different breeder and then they'll mix those with their bad birds. So if you're not happy with your birds and you find a better breeder, then the last thing you want to do is mix that with your existing stock. What you would want to do is raise those new birds from the better breeder and then get rid of your old birds that aren't so great. So now you're starting with the better line without any of the problems of mixing them.
and I do also want to add a little caveat here. We're talking about sibling inbreeding and avoiding that, but there are places where you might want to use that. And we're not going to go into detail about that, but I did want to say, like, um, there are some times when inbreeding with a purpose is part of a breeding program, but you want to have a purpose behind that.
That makes complete sense. It's one of those scary words that everyone intuitively wants to avoid. Um, but there's so many good lines that started from that or that have
Mhm.
incorporated that. And it's a very good strategic tool to have in your toolbox as a breeder. But yeah, what would you say for a beginner? That would not be a good standard practice, right?
Right.
So you would want to start with a colony, and I think you could stay in a colony setup for how many generations would you guess? A
Oh
hundred?
gosh. Yeah, many. Many,
Indefinitely.
many, many.
And so learning selection and raising birds in a colony is great. And if you want to know what to do next, that's where qualology comes in, or find a good breeder that can mentor you and learn how to do specific things if you have really specific goals that go outside of that.
And while we're talking about this, would you consider, we don't have to go into major detail, but would you consider spiral breeding as something a beginner should be looking at?
No, never. It's, it's one of those. It sounds great, and it's a great way to avoid inbreeding in a line that's battling inbreeding depression or something like that, which is very rare. But a lot of people set up a spiral breeding program, and to date, the number of people that I think should be doing that or that benefit from it is almost zero. I could probably count them on one hand.
Mhm.
So you almost put the cart before the horse when you set up a spiral breeding program. And what we were talking about earlier, letting the large colony have some sexual selection where the birds choose their own mates, is actually a stronger tool than what most small breeders or inexperienced breeders setting up a colony system are doing. So they actually limit themselves by doing that, and they would have better results in one large colony.
And this kind of goes back to what you were saying in the beginning of like a lot of people think that becoming a breeder, being a breeder, is difficult and you need lots of cages and it's time consuming, where you don't necessarily need a whole lot of cages. You can do colony breeding and kind of make things easier on yourself as a beginner.
Yep. I think almost everyone who joins Quillology was, as soon as that light bulb goes on and they see how easy setting up proper breeding programs are, they simplify. They get
Mhm.
rid of a bunch of birds, simplify their program. They have fewer cages. Some of them maybe have more birds. And there's almost a sigh of relief when you realize how easy it is to breed properly. So I see that in a lot of people that are just struggling and they're nervous or they're stressed about breeding responsibly. And then once they have a full picture of how easy it is to breed responsibly and the power of selection and colony breeding, uh, it's it's really fun.
Absolutely. All right, next.
My favorite one. Keep
Yeah.
backups. Always have a backup plan. It's
Yep.
never a bad idea to keep extra roosters in case something happens, because things do happen.
Hmm.
And it's good to have a trusted friend to hold a group of your line as insurance.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I've had
We've
this insurance. I've had,
exactly. Yeah. Leah, you and I have both used each other as an insurance plan because you never know what's going to happen. You could have a hurricane in your case, or a tornado here, or tornadoes in a hurricane there,
Mhm.
or fire, or a water system that goes out and you lose an entire stack of birds. There's so many things that could happen, and so it's never a bad idea to have a friend that you can share some birds with and say, just keep these for me in case something
Yeah,
happens.
just hold them.
Yeah, yeah, because you never know. Michael, you never had anything ever happen on your farm, right?
Unexpected things? Can't think of any. No, it's a regular occurrence. A brooder bulb goes out, or a water line gets clogged, or something. So,
Yeah,
um, also a disease could wipe out your whole
sure.
flock, or
Yeah.
whatnot. Especially if you're in a monitored flock where you're required to have a certain standard. So that's something that would be catastrophic to a primary breeder like yourself. So always good to have some way of starting over. Um, without actually starting over.
Hmm. All right. So, lastly, a great way to avoid new blood is to join Quailology. So, learn about breeding techniques that will enable you to keep a line going indefinitely. So, Michael, you brought up a good point. Once you got going with your farm and you had your lines going, how often did you purchase from other breeders?
Very, very rarely. So, and you'd have to have a good reason to do so.
Hmm.
So, if you're trying to acquire a new mutation or a bird with a very, very specific trait, that
Hmm.
would be a time to buy some new blood. Not that you're adding it into your own blood necessarily, unless you have a reason to do so if you're starting a new line. But as far as maintenance, never. And that goes for colonies of 10 birds or colonies of 1,000 birds. That when you're maintaining a line, when you're just keeping it going and keeping it consistent generation to generation, outcrossing isn't on the table. It's
Hmm.
not an option, even with other good breeders. So that's something I think both of you agree with, right? Do you ever
Absolutely.
even
Mhm.
consider buying something from another breeder? to change or manipulate one of your lines, or is that only for experimentation and starting new things?
It
It
is
only
strictly.
takes experimentation if I
Yeah.
were to do so. So
And you better believe if I bring in another line of something that looks like what I have. So I've, like, let's go back to the black line. I have my black line that I worked on and I perfected okay, it's not perfect. It'll never be perfect, but I got it from a long way from what it started out as. So when I obtained Michael's black line, I made sure that they were marked very clearly so that there was never a mistake of me mixing the lines. A bird ended up on the floor running around and I wasn't sure and I just put it in a cage. That does not happen. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with Michael's line. Michael has a wonderful black line, but I don't want to ever risk messing up his line or my line by adding, a bird to it that I'm not sure where it goes. So unless it's planned, that's the thing. If I want to see what happens when I put those two lines together, or maybe see a trait in Michael's line that I might like to add in mine, I'm going to create a subline. I'm going to put them in a different cage, and I'm going to make sure they're marked very clearly. Okay, so let's talk about genetic soup. Not all of us started with like beautiful birds from a really great breeder. I know that I am somebody that started, when I got into quail, I didn't really know that there were good breeders out there. I didn't really know what the options were. And I started on eBay. I just went to eBay and I looked through pictures and I found pretty birds in random assortments and I hatched them out and I put them all in the same cage and I created some super awesome genetic soup. And during that time of like learning about those birds and start, like I grew as a breeder by learning how to then pull out the individual genes from this genetic soup and create my own lines. So do I recommend that everybody do that? No. You can start with good lines and work towards your goals a whole lot faster. But I guess what I wanted to say is that if you already have some birds, if you already have genetic soup, you can work with those things. Not all of us started with perfect lines, and you can always start somewhere. What's your experience, Leah?
well, I scrapped my entire first bunch of birds to get better birds. I was kind of glad I had that experience too, because I knew pretty much from the get-go what I did not want.
Yeah.
So those first birds had terrible temperaments. The size ranges were all over the place. Tons of defects. So spent some money on not the best things, but it was a good learning opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned that I could be an extremely stubborn person from some of the starts of my lines. I keep bringing up my black line, but really when I got my black line, it was horrendous. it was this failure to thrive and defects and the color was off and like all these things. And I was absolutely the most stubborn person in the world. And I was determined that I was going to make that a good line. There's definitely other ways that I could have done it. I could have just waited around for Michael to finish his. I was determined that I was going to prove myself as a breeder to myself. I don't care about anybody else, but I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And I did. And so that's kind of where I'm going with this is that if you want to, if you're starting with something that's not fantastic, you can make it fantastic. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take cage space and, you know, feed and all those things, but you can do it. Or, you know, like what we talked about here, you can seek out a breeder that's already put in a lot of that work for you. Anybody else have any 2 cents before we finish?
I love that. I um, am curious because you made a thriving business out of that genetic soup beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what would you say to someone who wants to have a business like yours? Would you say start out the same way, learn all the same lessons, or would you go about it a little differently?
Oh, I would go about it 100% differently. I would start with good stock from good breeders, and I would join Quailology so I knew what to do with that stock once I had it, rather than trial and error for years. Okay. Now, I was
I did.
fortunate that uh, just real quick, I was fortunate that I was already breeding poultry before I got into quail. So I already had knowledge of a breeding program and how to breed and use selection and culling to get what I wanted. Had I not known that information, I don't know that I ever would have perfected that line. So,
That's
what were you
interesting.
going to say,
Okay.
Michael?
Oh, I'm just thinking back because I started with genetic soup too, and so no shame in that.
Hmm.
Um, my calico feline came out of that. So a really fantastic egg line with beautiful plumage. So like I'm glad and I'm appreciative of that. But
Hmm.
boy, was it frustrating trying to figure out what could be useful from those birds and expensive because most of them were not they were not up to par compared to other pure lines that I acquired later. So
Yep.
yep, that's something I think we both learned the hard way.
Speaking of expense, let's you know, you spent a lot of time working on your sell it online. um, at one point you figured out kind of the cost of creating that line, didn't you?
I did. Yep. So that was a business mistake. So creating a good quality sell it online from nothing, the way that I went about it, it never even paid for half of itself. Um, by the time I shut the farm down and was done selling breeding stock and eggs, it was a big net loss. So what I know now and what I learned over the last 5 years, 7 years was basically you don't have to breed at large scale to be selective and create a good line. So if I were to do that, sell it online again, I think I could accomplish it faster and much more affordably. Um, for people curious about the numbers, I put about $23,000 into creating the Red Range Sell It Online. Um, recouped about half of that over the next few years. And I think you could create a good quality line for well under $1,000. So it doesn't need to be huge. You don't have to have 1,000 birds and then select the best 10.
Mhm.
It's kind of ridiculous. You can do it that way. It's very expensive and it takes a long time. But if you use good breeding strategies and you plan things out and you go in increments, you go a little bit at a time and you're selective, you can do things a lot faster and a lot better.
Absolutely. And then of course, Leah, you were super smart by going, you know what, these birds are not even close to what my end goal is. I'm going to scrap these and just start over with something really good.
Right.
And of
Yeah.
course,
Well, those first birds too really made me question if I even wanted to raise quail.
yeah.
So I was like, I'm gonna give this another shot.
And Michael, you didn't really have that opportunity with your sell it online because there weren't necessarily established lines that were, you know, fixed and, you know, ready to go for you to start with, right?
Um, so when I started raising them, nobody, there was no agreement yet on whether the Celadon trait could even breed true.
Hmm.
So a lot of the best Celadon breeders that had the best quality Celadons had flocks that were 50% true, 70% true, meaning only 70% of the eggs laid would actually have that trait of the light blue eggs. And so, not to knock on any of those breeders, but I think I was the first one that made the mistake of making a good quality Celadon line. So now, now that there's more of us who know how to breed well, I think there's quite a few good Celadon lines. And anyone who's gone through the Quillology tutorials, I'm working on one specific for Celadons because they are so much harder to breed.
Mhm.
But even just knowing the basics of breeding, you can create good lines. And you just have to be a lot more selective with Celadon. It brings out bad traits that don't exist in normal lines. So that was one of the problems with that.
So back to, I'm just going to use this to wrap up our show here. You spent all that time and effort and money to make a Celadon line that bred true, and you bred out the faults, as close as you could that occur with Celadon. Would you have then gone and to one of those other breeders that had some Celadon lines and added those birds to yours?
Well, this is an interesting test case because many people did that.
Mhm.
And so they would acquire the red range Celadons and they got exported over to Europe and all over the world, basically. And many people immediately outcrossed them and outcrossed them to different plumage types to create different colors of Celadon. And what's interesting is they were so unprolific because of all the health defects when you outcross that it took a long time for those other plumages to get established. So even today, if you search for pure blue celadons, what you see available all over the place is red range celadons.
Which
And
was your
th-
original line.
so basically, if you kept that
Mhm.
plumage, those traits are like the roux is recessive and the other traits were pure. So um, pure for celadon, pure for extended brown. Um, And so when you see those for sale, they likely were never outcrossed because the ones that weren't outcrossed tended to be the most prolific. I
Mhm.
think I was through 10 or 11 generations of those birds before they were released, and most celadons will fall apart on generation 3 to 4.
Mhm.
So if you're not incredibly selective, or if you don't know what you're doing, a lot of celadon breeders get stuck in the same loop we talked about, where you
Yep.
outcross every couple of generations as soon as you start seeing problems, and that becomes your breeding strategy. Um, but this the reason I say it's an interesting test case is just because you saw that particular plumage of true celadon proliferate all over the place.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. And Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes,
We
thank you.
always love having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And
Make sure to like and subscribe.
have a great night.